4, 3, 2, 1.
Now, as I was talking about the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage in the last couple of segments, I found it just as surprising that the Pope was totally silent on this as I found it surprising that he was pushing for a global regime in the name of global warming this last week. And of course, we did have the U.S. Catholic bishops make a statement. And the strange thing about it to me was, this is what he had to say. He said, the unique meaning of marriage as the union of one man and one woman, and this is the Archbishop Kurtz of Louisville, Kentucky. He's president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. He said, the unique meaning of marriage between one man and one woman is inscribed in our bodies as male and female. And this is what I think is interesting. He says, the protection of this meaning is a critical dimension of the integral ecology, quote unquote. He puts that in quotes, that Pope Francis has called us to promote. So even he doesn't really appeal to any biblical authority or any papal authority to support marriage. Instead, he talks about integral ecology. And after the, as they were looking at the encyclical that was coming from the Pope, the Huffington Post had an article about Pope Francis's integral ecology. They said there's a new term being bandied about, and it's high time we paid heed. Integral ecology. They say whenever the same notion arises synchronously in a number of different contexts, in this case, the Catholic Church, the Occupy movement, the climate movement, the new economy movement, it's an idea whose time has arrived. No, it is an idea that is part of a propaganda campaign coming from the socialist left that and the world government people. The Occupy movement, now what the Pope is doing is using this and promoting scientists who have called for population control and world government. And of course, that's all part of the new economy movement. So the only way that they could try to justify supporting traditional marriage was to refer to the Pope's pronouncement about global warming. And of course, in one way, it's not surprising that they would do this because, as I've said before, climate change really is a religion. As a matter of fact, the guy who is head of the UN Council for that, the UN IPCC, said climate change is my religion, my dharma. They've made no bones about that. They have always argued from the position of authority. They say, we are the experts. And if you heard the program on Friday when I talked to Mark Dice and we went through all of these different petitions that he's done in California, the underlying theme of all of that is just the blatant appeal to authority. If he would come up to somebody and say, do this for Obama, sign this petition for Obama, they would do it. Or if you tell them the majority of scientists believe that this is going to happen, they will do it. That's why today I want you to get a picture of this magazine on the desk here. I brought in an issue of Newsweek, a special report from July 16th, 1979, 36 years ago. The Energy Crisis, a program for the 80s. Now, when I open this up to that report, a program for the 80s, they have this page here, Why We Must Act Now. And if you can see this, back in 1979, the experts, the authorities that we're supposed to defer to unquestioningly, told us that we had 8.7 years left of crude oil. We had only 10.7 years left of natural gas. We have kind of a glut of natural gas right now. But they were telling us that we had to act because we only had about 10 years left, and that was back in 1979. That's what the experts were telling us. And of course, if you look down through this article, they had all kinds of stuff like, yeah, we need a massive new tax because we need to control and ration this resource. What are they proposing with global climate change control? Well, massive new taxes, but of course they won't be going to any national government. They will be going to an international government. They will be going to some bankers who will use that as kind of a religious indulgence for us. So whenever we see these kinds of pronouncements by the authorities and we see this kind of consensus among scientists, we need to take that with a grain of salt. And I know many of you did. I saved this article because I knew it was total bunk. I knew it would be something we could all laugh at in a few years, and it is absolutely absurd to predict that by the late 1980s we were going to be out of oil. But I remember pop tunes about that. There's only so much oil in the ground. I mean, that was from Tower of Power. It was a great song, but had nonsense lyrics. But we've seen that push through the culture. That was what everybody was saying at that point in time. We have reached peak oil. We're going to be out of crude oil. That didn't happen, so now they're trying to find a different way to control our energy use, because that is the ultimate way that they can control you, is through energy use. But they're not going to be content with that. They come at us from multiple directions. Just as we saw this last week, we had calls for world government from the Pope, but we also had calls and pushing towards world government from these trade treaties, these trade agreements. They're also not going to limit themselves just to controlling your energy, of course. They're going to come after you medically. If you didn't see it in the last segment, we're going to keep putting this up here. The projection from Newsweek back in 1979, how we only had 8.7 years left of crude oil, and we only had 10.7 years left of natural gas. Notice how precise those numbers are. 8.7 years left and 10.7 years left, okay? So we would have been 20 years ago out of both crude oil and natural gas if the experts were right. But of course, they always argue from authority. Pull that up one more time, because there's a third one here that I didn't mention, and that is coal. They had worked out that we had precisely 666.5 years left. So at some point, it was going to be like on New Year's Eve, 666 years from 1979, because this was in July or whatever, they were going to run out of we will run out of coal. So there you go. So we had to act then. And, you know, it's interesting to see that their prescriptions were the same that we see for global warming and climate change now. Massive new taxes, rationing, government control. That's always a solution. Crisis, solution. And they offer us a phony, bad outcome that isn't going to really happen. There you go. You can see that massive new taxes that they're talking about. But, of course, we have today a government that is not really even trying to scare us into action. They're just going to hold a gun to your head. That's what the trade agreements are essentially about. But they're going to start trying to ram through Congress. There's probably pretty soon. They've already written these trade agreements. They got fast-track passed last week. And, of course, there are multiple bills throughout this country, especially in California, where they're just going to hold a gun to your head and say, we don't really care what you're about your consent. We don't care what you believe. We don't care that you're concerned about risks. You don't get to make those decisions. You're going to do what we have to say. The science is settled, and you're just going to do it. In the same way that the science was settled in the late 70s that we were going to run out of oil in 10 years. We didn't. And the science is not settled about climate change. The science is not settled about vaccines.